Good afternoon, everyone. It is Friday, August 11th, 2023. It's time for This Week in Crypto. And calling the markets boring would be one of the great understatements. Bitcoin and Ether for the entire week moved around almost not at all, or up about 1% or so each from last week, which was also in a range. The chart, when you look at it, you see a squiggle and you look at it, it says, wow, look, a big move happened. And then you look at the scale and you say, oh, so like $100 in Bitcoin. Absolutely crazy. Very little happening. Volumes down, not a lot happening. And volatility is plumbing lows that we haven't seen in many, many years. Now, underneath the surface, however, what you have is buyers willing to buy the dip, basically on what I call patient buying, and the exhaustion of speculators who every time they hear something think that something's going to happen, and really a lack of news and a waiting period. So what are the news stories for today and for this week? And honestly, the truth of the matter is we're really kind of riding in place, but there was a couple of things worth talking about. So let's start with the big news of today. Sam Bankman-Fried doing the perp walk. Now, we were yet to see him in an orange jumpsuit. We're yet to see him doing the really famous walk. But evidently, leaking a girlfriend's diary to try to corrupt a state's witness is enough to get the judges and the prosecutors in the system mad at you. So there you have it. Now, we know his lawyers already said they're going to appeal, and who knows what's going to happen. We understand. We also saw earlier this week that the prosecutors said they were not abandoning the case on election reform or et cetera, the campaign finance, charges, but merely we're going to refile them later once they cleared up a few issues. So we'll see what happens. Now, the conspiracy theorists on the internet have been going crazy. Of course, the very first thing that I saw that made me laugh, I'm not going to lie, was the idea that he might go to the same jail that Jeffrey Epstein was in. And given the campaign finance issue and the problem with discovery and what he might know, people were suggesting that maybe the camera's wiring is getting faulty again. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen. In fact, I doubt they'll even put him in the same place. But the reality is, this is going to be a lot of people talking about it. The truth of the matter is, I've made myself very clear on this issue. He needs to go away for a very, very long time. In addition to causing immense financial crimes against a lot of people, many of which he misled. In fact, systematically misled by taking their money to make himself appear more powerful and bigger and more safe as a company, FTX at least, than it deserved to be. That is a con that actually is at the Madoff level and maybe bigger in many cases. I also think that there are probably some politicians who don't want him to be talking because they probably have some money that they don't want to give back or can't give back because it's already spent. But we'll see how it goes. In any event, with that aside, let's talk about a few other stories. The second story I want to talk about is kind of interesting. Probably in a slow news week like this would have gotten more airtime, but between some of the SEC stories we're about to talk about and SBF, not a lot of coverage. But there was an interesting incident. Gemini decided after the Torres ruling to relist XRP. And unfortunately, they had a little glitch. XRP trading up to about, $50, almost 100 times its natural price, because they didn't have enough liquidity on the exchange to handle it, and there were nothing stopping that. Now, I mention this because the same sort of behavior, same sort of thing used to happen all the time in crypto. Most exchanges have gotten a little bit better at understanding the liquidity dynamics. But why we care is for everyone watching this, CoinRoutes, if you're using us, and even if you were trading on Gemini, even if you were trading XRP, yeah, it would have known to sell if you were doing a sell order pretty aggressively when that happened. But if you were buying, it wouldn't have even attempted to buy. It would have said, no. This is way too high. Now, the reason I mentioned that is because while it doesn't happen 100 times, markets in crypto are crossed all day long, meaning the bid is often higher than the offer, bid on one exchange, offer on another exchange, meaning having a system like ours helps you navigate and do a better job. And while I don't like to make this particular recap of commercial for CoinRoutes, we're about to produce some reporting which shows that over the first 7 months of the year, on almost $12 billion of vanilla orders using our base algorithm, Smart Post, that across all spot trading on that $12 billion of institutional sized orders, the average cost all in, including exchange fees, from the far side of the quote when you got the order was somewhere less than 7 basis points. Now, when you consider that U.S. equities for the same rough sizing is somewhere over 11.5 basis points of cost. That is extremely important. And it tells you that if you're using the right software in crypto, as fragmented as the market is, it is actually cheaper to trade institutional size than a lot of other markets, in particular equities, which are considered to be the most efficient in the entire world, which clearly that's not the case. Now, retail investors in equities get a much better deal than they do in crypto, but that's because retail products in crypto don't care about delivering best execution and don't care if they charge large fees. But we operate in the institutional space. So honestly, that's where our clients do better. Okay, let's talk about 3 different SEC stories. And I'm going to try to be brief this week because it's really like beating a dead horse at this point. The first one is the SEC announced a settlement with Bittrex. Now, Bittrex used to operate in the US, by far had the broadest coverage of tokens in the United States for US investors. I can remember myself being able to lose money buying a coin called Cannabis Coin back in the day. I didn't lose a lot of money, but I remember buying it. It is since defunct, like many old coins went defunct. And I did it on Bittrex as I was a Bittrex account user. Now, Bittrex, however, has since left the United States entirely, operating overseas. So this is a classic case of strategy. So, the strategy of predators in the African savanna is always to go after the slowest, weakest, or most sickly in the herd. Why? Because they're the easiest to bring down. So if you're the SEC trying to establish jurisdiction against exchanges, Bittrex is the perfect target. And them settling allows you to say, you see, they hate us for this technical violation. Obviously with a veiled reference to Coinbase, who of course is already filed a motion for dismissal, and that will maybe be impacted by the next story. But the Bittrex case really is pretty much meaningless, and anyone who looks at this says, well, okay, Bittrex did nothing. The SEC did their normal shakedown of somebody, and of course, given the fact they already chose to leave the US, it was cheaper for them just to settle it than to fight it because they're not trying to fight for their ongoing business, which of course is exactly why Coinbase is fighting. If Coinbase could have settled for 20 million bucks, I have no doubt they would have just settled, gave the SEC their win, and kept doing their business as they were doing it. But they were given no ability to do that. So that's why they did what they did. Okay, next case. The SEC is filed or signaled an intention or asked for permission to file an interlocutory appeal against the Torres ruling in the XRP case. Now, this has been covered really well on Twitter by Meta Lawman and to some degree by John Deaton. I advise you, if you follow me, then you'll see it because I've retweeted it or quote tweeted both of them, or follow Meta Lawman on Twitter and you can find out about it. But what matters here is the supposition is Torres gets to actually decide whether to approve the appeal or not. And the actual betting right now by the smart money is she will, mostly because it will allow her to defend her decision and actually rebut some of the somewhat overreaching claims made by Judge Rakoff in his particular case, which, by the way, was totally different in the facts and circumstances than the XRP case. We talked about that last week. The reality, however, is this changes nothing. It changes nothing, not for a long time. It means we won't get clarity for a lot longer because these things take a long time. The only way to get clarity would be somehow for the bipartisan efforts in Congress to go somewhere. But when the administration is openly hostile to that, it makes that unlikely. So we're likely staying in the same situation. The reality is, when you look at all of this stuff when it comes to the non-Bitcoin side of crypto, you're basically seeing an SEC that, as I summed up today, is doing completely counterproductive things. What they're doing is forcing firms offshore, meaning that U.S. investors are either forced to try to use less compliant methods or not at all have access to a market that they want to have access to. In either case, that's a bad idea. It's forcing U.S. innovators who want to raise funds to do that offshore or move offshore, which is moving jobs offshore. So it doesn't protect the investors. It discourages capital formation. And frankly, it makes the markets less efficient. And we have proof of this. In the report that we're going to produce over the next week, what we're going to show is that crypto pairs that trade against US dollars have gotten significantly more expensive to trade with significantly more volatility on their spreads than pairs against stable coins like Tether, which is exactly the opposite of the way it used to be before things like Operation Choke Point got started and all of the various things that we've been chronicling over the last 6 months. So their SEC ideas here are counterproductive. I think they kind of know that. Certainly Congress knows that. Congressman Davidson was on Crypto Town Hall effectively talking about this chapter and verse today again. And so maybe people will get to wake up and this will become a political issue. But Bitcoin is different. Now, Bitcoin today, the SEC did what everyone expected, but with a twist. So people expected them to delay the decision on the ARK ETF, the one that's filed with CBOE, as opposed to the Fidelity and the BlackRock ETFs and a bunch of the others that refiled recently that we've talked about a lot. But what's interesting is they didn't deny it. They didn't just delay it. They delayed it and reopened the comment period. And so they're giving people 3 weeks to make comments. I would like to see everyone who listens to this, myself included, I will write one, but it could be a very simple one saying, please approve this ETF and all the spot ETFs that meet a minimum threshold of surveillance sharing. Why? Because the already approved ETF, the futures-based ones, are underperforming spot by over 30%. So please, Mr. Gensler, give investors who want to invest in Bitcoin the ability to do so without having to take a 30% cut in the performance that they're going to achieve. The SEC is supposed to protect investors, not cause them direct harm. Now, if they get a few thousand letters that say that, I think they will approve. I think they're probably going to approve it anyway, but given the fact that they're asking for it, it's incumbent upon all of us to actually produce that comment. And others on the same ilk. But it is worth noting, and we're going to conclude on an optimistic point, it is worth noting that this is the first time that they've done something that I would consider conciliatory to the industry. I've said before, first they laugh at you, then they ignore you, then they fight you, and then you win, isn't really true. In between fighting you and winning, there's a negotiation phase. And I talked about this several weeks ago, that we were in the negotiation phase. Well, we are, and this is what negotiation looks like. It gives them a credible reason to approve the bigger companies, the BlackRock and Fidelities, before approving the ARK one, and gives them a credible reason to cite as part of the win that I think he should take by getting these surveillance sharing agreements, which would give the SEC some ability to regulate the Bitcoin spot market, which they have none otherwise, because Bitcoin, by his own admission, is a commodity. So, while the market is stuck like people running on a hamster wheel, progress behind the scenes is being made. And so that's somewhat optimistic. In any case, the rest of the weekend is likely to be just as boring. Even the perp walk rally didn't seem to want to happen. And enjoy the weekend and stay safe out there. And let's hope for some more news as the next couple of weeks unfold. Take care.